And we have a phenomenal guest for you this morning. We have Russell, Texas Bentley. He is on the ground in the Donetsk, fighting on the front lines, actually. Russell, Texas Bentley, is born in Texas in 1960, went to Donetsk in December 2014 to fight Ukrainian Nazis and protect Donetsk civilians from attacks by the Ukrainian army. After serving for a year as a soldier in some of the heaviest fighting, including Donetsk Airport, Spartak, and Avdiivka, he transitioned into information warfare and human aid work, which he continues to this day. Russell, thank you for joining us, man. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's a real testament to your journalistic integrity.
Well, honestly, as I've said many times, my job is to just provide context. This is the reality of events, because what you are not getting in the United States is that if you turn on any network, if you turn on any mainstream media, if you're looking at any newspaper, it is one very specific narrative. Putin is a maniac. Putin is crazy. There are no Nazis in Ukraine at all. That's just entirely made up. They completely whitewash the war that has taken place over the last 8 years with the Ukrainian military attacking ethnic Russian Ukrainians. It's amazing. If you're here, it's very Black Mirror-ish and Twilight Zone-esque in the way that they basically switched over to full-time, 24/7 war propaganda on behalf of Ukraine. It's astonishing when you look at it. They're talking about Zelensky as a hero, despite the fact that he dragged the country into a war, and he's been backing the killing of ethnic Russian Ukrainians for the past several years. How do you see this? I mean, you're there, you're fighting on the front lines. You decided to basically go and serve in order to protect that region. I guess the very first question is, you're a Texan. What are you doing in Ukraine?
Well, I was born in 1960, and so I grew up at a time when the United States was very much different than it is today. I mean, I understand, of course, it was never perfect, but I mean, I lived in Dallas. I was a little kid when Kennedy was killed. I was in Dallas, and I remember it. And from that point on, I always wondered, about the dominant paradigm, the collective perception of the world by the people around me and other perspectives. And, as a kid in the 1960s and early 70s, it was the days of Vietnam, the civil rights, the beginning of the ecological movement. And I was a voracious reader, and I started reading, Ho Chi Minh and Che Guevara. And I came to understand that, that the Vietnamese people were protecting themselves, their country, from an invading army. What the United States did in Vietnam was the same as what the German Nazis did in the Second World War to Europe, and I understood that. My grandfather was a soldier in the U.S. Army, a tankist, and fought against the German Nazis in the Second World War. And so I understood that the perspective that most people have in the West, and especially the United States, and especially in like the super conservative, almost, Ku Klux Klan in Dallas in the 1960s, that there was a different perspective, and that probably the different one was more closer to the truth.
Yeah.
So growing up, I saw like what happened in Yugoslavia in 1999. I saw the
bombing by Clinton.
The WMDs that turned out to be completely bogus and started a war that killed millions of people. 9/11, that whole thing. And then Libya, which I was a great admirer of Muammar Gaddafi. Most Americans think that he's just a crazy dude that rode a camel and lived in a tent and wore strange clothes. But I understood, because I had looked into it, that Libya had the highest standard of living in all of Africa, and higher than many places in Eastern Europe or even, South and Central America. And that was exactly because Gaddafi was a great leader. He did, great things, not just for Libya, but for Africa. And I admired him very much. And when I saw him murdered, when I saw the greatest, most successful country in Africa turned into a slave market and a hellhole, and Mad Max, it really got to me.
Rattled you.
When I saw in 2014 the Maidan begin, and I knew it was another U.S. regime change operation, which it was, a violent overthrow of a democratically elected government, and an installation of a puppet government that included genuine Heil Hitler neo-Nazis, it really bugged me. And then when I started seeing the atrocities that happened in 2014, I decided that I was going to come here and fight. And I did.
And so you've been on the ground for the last several years. What has been taking place over the last 8 years in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions?
Well, it's as many people apparently don't understand in the West, and also as journalists or just regular citizens, this war didn't start, 2 weeks ago when Russia finally came in. It started 8 years ago, and it's a genuine war of a full-on national military, and I'm talking like the 14th or 15th biggest army in the world against a small minority of its own citizens. And this war has gone on since 2015, and the citizens here in Donbass, which is the area that includes the Donetsk People's Republic, where I live, and the Lugansk People's Republic. It's not a very large area. It has about 3 million people in total, and we've stood off this Ukrainian army for 8 years. It was the People's Militia, taxi drivers, teachers, students, coal miners. This is a major coal mining area and industrial area. It's kind of like somewhere between the Appalachia and the Texas of Ukraine. And these people, they started off with, shotguns and baseball bats, and now have stood off this army for 8 years. The thing that happened was the Russians discovered that the Ukrainians, with the instruction and the backing of U.S. and NATO, had an imminent plan to make a major military offensive into the major cities of Donbass. People have to understand that the Ukrainian army is literally on the edge of our cities. Like in the city of Donetsk, where I live, population about 1 million people, the Ukrainian army from the center of the city is less than 10 miles away to the combat front.
Oh, wow.
They frequently shell, this whole time in the last 8 years, they frequently shell just randomly, and sometimes specifically at like certain schools or hospitals or something. But they shell the city basically every day, and they're right on the front line, and they can come in anytime. There's 150,000 Ukrainian soldiers on the Donbass front, which is about a 250 mile front for the whole thing. And so 150,000 soldiers on the line, 10 miles from the center of our main cities. They can come in anytime. Our guys, we have about 30 to 40,000 of our soldiers, our People's Militia Defense Forces, on the line against them. But, these Ukrainians, they've been backed up. They've been trained by, the top SAS, U.S. Green Berets, special forces from Turkey and stuff like that. They're backed up by mercenaries from Blackwater. They're backed up by thousands. Turkey and Ukraine have imported thousands of ISIS terrorists from Syria to fight alongside the Ukrainian army. This has been documented by major mainstream sources in the United States media since 2015. I'm talking like New York Times was reporting about it back in 2015. It's been going on ever since. There's thousands of these ISIS cannibals here, neo-Nazis, really hardcore Nazis, and professional mercenaries along with the regular Ukrainian army. And their plan, which they intended to start an offensive on the 22nd of February, a couple of weeks ago, was to come directly in to the centers of the major cities, of which, it's a 10-mile drive and you're there from where they are now.
That close.
They were going to come in, use the civilians as human shields. As we can see now, since the Russian intervention has begun, that's exactly, it's not a tactic, it is their strategy to use civilians as human shields, to make as much destruction chaos, death, and suffering as possible.
Not to mention
And
AIDS and a
it's, you know,
propaganda outlet also. But to be able to say, hey, look at all of these people that were basically killed, missing the point that the military was basically using those civilian population as shields. From your standpoint, and we only have about 2 minutes left, what was the reason, meaning for the American audience who is first hearing this for the first time, they've never heard anything like this because the media basically absolved or removed all of this. What were the reasons that the regions separated after the coup government took over?
Because the eastern regions, the eastern part of Ukraine is most ethnically Russian speaking. The president that was deposed by the U.S.-backed coup was elected primarily by their support. I mean, he had like 90% of the vote for him in the eastern parts of Ukraine. So, you know, the president that they elected was overthrown. And then the government that was put in by the United States. I mean, Victoria Nuland's famous F the EU phone call, most important point about that was that she told Jeffrey Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador, exactly who she wanted in what position of the new government. And in every single case, exactly those people went in to exactly those positions. So, you know, to call Ukraine a democracy is laughable. And so these people, and not only that, you know, the democracy was debauched in Ukraine, but the people that they put in are, I mean, we're talking genuine Heil Hitler Nazis, the people that are the descendants of Ukrainian collaborators of the German Nazis that occupied Ukraine during the Second World War. They have swastika tattoos, swastika flags, and they use genuine Nazi tactics like human shields, like torturing and murdering prisoners. You know, I mean, this is, you know, there really is, they're genuine. I mean, it's not hyperbole or rhetoric or exaggeration to call them Nazis, and people need to understand that. And what they were planning was a genuine genocide to kill hundreds of thousands of people here, basically depopulate this area. And this was with the connivance of the U.S. and NATO, and it's all being exposed now and documented.
Russell, I think that's the saddest part of this, and that's the part that's being absolved, like completely obfuscated in this media space. Russell, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate this. Russell Texas Bentley, he went to Donetsk in 2014 to fight the Ukrainian Nazis and protect Donetsk civilians from attacks by the Ukrainian army. He served as a soldier in some of the heaviest fighting in that region, including Donetsk Airport, Spartika, and Avdiivka. He transitioned into information warfare and human aid work, which he continues to this day. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas, Franzak, back in a moment.
All right, thanks a lot, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.